Good afternoon. Can you all hear me? Okay, thank you. My name is Dan Kevles. I have the privilege of moderating this panel on personalized medicine. I'm a historian of science and technology, and so I'm just going to take about 30 seconds to put this panel in a very long-term historical perspective. If we think about the development of medicine, we can start with the Greeks. And for thousands of years, until the end of sometime in the 17th or 18th centuries, medicine was based on the Galenic theory that we were all subject or determined by four humors: yellow bile, black bile, urine, and blood. And disease was the result of an imbalance among those humors, or part of those humors. So we were all the same in a sense, and all disease was the same for everybody. Beginning in about the late 18th century until very recent years, medicine developed in a much more scientific way and attributed disease in anybody as the expression of the malfunctions of a biological, chemical nature in particular organs. So if you have liver disease, your disease was an expression of a kind of liver disease that was universal among people suffering all those diseases. We're now entering into a revolutionary new period in the development of medicine that is characterized by a personalized character. And our panel is going to explain to us what personalized medicine means, but just to adumbrate what they have to say, it is a medicine that is very specific to you as an individual based on your profile in a number of dimensions, including your genes. In order to, and furthermore, you will hear that unlike the most of the history of medicine, which was much more concerned with the treatment of disease, this new medicine opens up vastly new and exciting possibilities in the prevention of it. Prevention was a long-term project going back to the Greeks, but basically it involved leading a moral life, a balanced life, and so on. But now it's going to be different. So then follow upon that introduction, we have two very distinguished scientists to aid us in understanding this revolutionary new era that we are now embarked upon. Francis Arnold and Scott Fraser. I'm sure that you have all gotten to know each of them, both from the printed programs and also from their marvelous performances in other panels preceding this one. Just let me say about that each of them is characterized remarkably by accomplishments and deep knowledge in biology, medicine, and technology, and that each of them has been an innovator and a pioneer in all three of those fields, and that each of them walks both sides of the street, if you will, in an era when we're concerned with the translation of knowledge into social, economic, and medical utility, that they have been involved in startup companies that have been successful, and each of them is the holder or co-holder of numerous patents. So, without further ado, then, of an introductory nature, I want to move then on to our subject. Per usual, we will have each of the presenters speak briefly, and then I will encourage them to debate with each other or illuminate what the other has to say. And then we'll give over the last 20 minutes or so to questions from the audience to address to the speakers. So first I want to turn to Francis and say, Francis, can you help us understand what personalized medicine actually is and is likely to become?
Great question. I love talking about the future of technology in a room where they haven't fed the hamsters that are running the air conditioning system. So we'll try to keep the hot air down here. Dan, everybody is different, right? And those differences really matter when it comes to healthcare because we differ in our genetic makeup. We've grown up in different places. We live in different environments. We've had many different experiences, you've eaten different foods, and you behave differently, right? The way that you respond to treatments of disease, your susceptibility for disease, they all different, and each of us is unique. So the goal of personalized medicine, of course, is to practice medicine taking those real differences into account, both in diagnosing and treating disease as well as in maintaining your wellness. And I think that's an especially important part of it. What can we do to maintain our health, not just intervene in disease? So the idea is that a one-size-fits-all healthcare is not appropriate in an era where we are understanding more and more about those differences. So I would say the goal, Dan, of personalized medicine is to make accurate predictions about the future of medicine based on future medical treatments and interventions that's based on genetic and other information that gives you a relative likelihood that you will get disease. So starting with the human genome, right? We've heard a lot here at this meeting over the last 2 days about these immense changes in technology. There was this great session that Scott participated in, and you showed this supra-Moore's law decrease in the cost of sequencing. Well, one consequence of that is we can know your detailed genetic makeup. But they say that genes load the gun, right? But it's environment that pulls the trigger. So yes, we can sequence your genome, but that's not the whole story. The whole story is much more complicated. That's what keeps people like me in business, because we love making things more complicated, making more gadgets that will measure more things. But we need more information to truly make this a powerful technology. So we'll hear about some of those technologies, I think. And the goal then, of course, is to give the patient and the doctor combined something that you can act upon, right? Not just all this data, but information and knowledge that can give you specific things that you can do to intervene. I love debating people who aren't here. So Harold Varmus will be my sparring partner. He told us, if you went to his session, I think some of you did, that personal medicine, his view of personal medicine, personalized medicine, was his grandfather. 50 years ago, who knew personally each and every one of his patients and had known them for years and years. And that person, that doctor, could go in and treat a person. Well, it wasn't a computer, right? He doesn't like the idea that a computer replaces the doctor. But let's face it, right? Medical care, healthcare is huge. It's costly, it's wasteful, and it is a hell of a lot more complicated than it was 50 years ago, right? So the knowledge base is growing exponentially, and no one doctor can be an expert at everything. So why are we afraid of enhancing the doctor with data analysis, information, and knowledge that you can get from that? You're not afraid of using Netflix to tell you what movies to watch. Makes pretty good predictions. Pandora knows your tastes better than you do. Driverless car drives a lot better than my teenagers. Autopilot on jets these are important enhancing technologies that can really also be used to enhance the effectiveness of medicine. So I think that we're going to see, based on the revolution in technologies like wearables and predictive analytics, machine learning tools, that will now and soon in the future really change the way that medicine can be practiced.
Thank you very much, Frances. Scott, would you help us further to understand the enabling knowledge, the science, and the technologies that are enabling the development of personalized medicine?
Yeah, I think Frances gave a very good summary of the powers and the approach, and I don't see it as an either or. So Harold said that his grandfather, I believe it was, knew every patient. And with these tools, he would still know every patient, he'd just know a lot more about them. And so our goal right now is to make that data accessible. So it might not always be Harold's grandfather that would treat you. If your record is annotated, what we're not proposing is the Star Trek medical deck, where you go in, they have no records of you, but they put the tricorder across you and they instantly know your genome and several other things about you. The idea is to extract knowledge and to make that knowledge actionable by putting it in context. That means it needs to follow you around. If I have a cardiac event here, I'm hoping that every record, I'm not planning on it, but I'm hoping that every record that's associated with me would be accessible to the clinicians here. And the reality is most of them aren't. So right now, the doctors have to be amazing problem solvers with a limited amount of data in hand and have to try to convert that limited amount of data into actionable knowledge. What I think we're in right now is a real revolution, I think was your statement. Because we now can, in a cost-effective way, acquire more data that can go into those decisions and that can constrain us both in the solutions and in what not to do. I've had several people working with me over the years with intractable headaches. And I don't know of any of them that have ever had fewer medications over time. They keep on adding another drug and another drug, what the clinicians do, to their makeup, and to where you start getting odd cross effects and several other things. And so that's the opposite of personalized medicine. That is educated guesswork until hopefully you've got the house of cards put together. The example that I like a lot is to think about this as a way to know what not to do. So COX-2 inhibitors, for example, based on clinical trials, were fantastic for many people with arthritis. A small fraction of those had side effects that I think could be genetically predicted now, that even though a small fraction had the side effects, the drugs were taken off the market for everybody. I think now we've got to think about using genomic and proteomic and other laboratory tests to play a matchmaking game between you and the drugs that would best treat you.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad, Scott, that you came down to a concrete example of how personalized medicine and the technologies that undergird it would work. I wonder if, Francis, you could provide some additional examples of how concrete examples of how personalized medicine might work for all of us.
Well, I think probably many of you went to the several cancer sessions, and that's a great example, right? We've gone from cutting it out, hitting everybody with radiation, chemotherapy. I see a number of women in this room. 1/8 of you at least has gone through breast cancer. Not all of you had to go through chemotherapy. And just in the last 10, 15 years, we've now identified, you know that if you have stage 1 breast cancer, that 90% of you will have no recurrence. Yet, very often, chemotherapy is given to a very large fraction of those women to stave off that recurrence in a very small population. If you can identify the markers that really characterize a recurring breast cancer, then you can target chemotherapy to the specific population. This is a very debilitating thing, chemotherapy, because I speak from experience. And if it's available to know exactly who is likely to benefit, then you save the other 80% of women from going through that. And there's multiple examples of that in prostate cancer, lung cancer biopsies, where we can save an enormous amount of healthcare costs and debilitating effects on the patients by targeting the therapies to the people who will benefit from it. That's really the key.
Scott, would you say something about the preventive side? personalized medicine?
Yeah, I think what we're very excited about, and then Frances can probably expand on this because she's involved in one of the efforts to really make this a real entity. But unlike, say, Gattaca or the sort of movies that talk about almost a dystopian use of ideas about what your medical records might reveal, I feel that they can really show the things that are likely to go wrong. And each one of us probably have different susceptibilities. I would much rather have the testing, the care, the monitoring directed towards those diseases I'm most likely to get, and maybe get those far more often than others. I mean, one of our colleagues at Stanford is a sequencer, sequenced himself and discovered he had a major susceptibility gene for diabetes. And he sort of, he took this almost as the evidence of how dangerous the predictive medicine can be. And then after his next bout of flu, he came down with diabetes. So basically he was poised, and I think Frances said it right, it loads the gun was loaded. The case of influenza was what pulled the trigger and got his immune system to go a little bit overboard. And knowing that, if I had that same susceptibility gene, I'd be having my blood chemistry checked, twice a year or something of that sort. So there's other things that aren't so important. And so the idea of being able to do it as a prognosticator of what to pay attention for, what to train the person for. We've been working on ways of detecting eye disease, and there's a few genetic markers for people that are much more likely to get macular degeneration, are much more likely to get diabetic retinopathy. And it doesn't make it a foregone conclusion, but if I was that person's ophthalmologist, or if I was that ophthalmologist patient, I would want to be trained in how to recognize those early onset signs. Now that's sort of on a one-off thing. This is not yet an organized sort of thing, but Frances is involved in one of the efforts. I'm sorry,
That's okay.
I'm usurping our chairman, so I may suffer later. But Frances has been involved in one of the exciting efforts to try to make this real and really make it a formal procedure.
Frances.
Gee, that was...
Thank you.
Well, I think knowing what to look at, Scott, is really important, but knowing how to change your behavior, right? Taking part in your own healthcare is also part of this movement. It's not just eminence-based medicine, right, where the doctor is the source of all knowledge. I think in this era where healthcare costs are rapidly increasing and we're being asked to bear a larger fraction of those costs, we will become more interested, also for our own well-being, we will become more interested in taking part in maintaining wellness, right? Taking part, of course, in our disease treatment, but also staying well in a science-based fashion. So that means that if you know that you have a higher risk of type 2 diabetes, for example, let's say you learn from your genetic testing that you've got a 1.4 relative risk of diabetes, type 2 diabetes, and then you know the baseline is 23%. You know that 23% of people in this country are going to have type 2 diabetes, and your relative risk is higher than 1, then you better start watching your weight a little bit better, right? And start eating in a more healthy manner because you're especially susceptible to that. And there are tons of examples like that where armed with this scientific information, you can begin to participate and make action. Another great example for those of you whose sons play sports, if they have mutations that give them susceptibility to Alzheimer's, they shouldn't be playing headbutting sports because their relative risks go way up. And we should know that about our children, given their permission, and we should know that about ourselves.
Let me jump in here to raise a little cautionary note. In a sense, what you're saying is that this is a much more precise and much more technological version of WebMD, right? That we all go to WebMD and say, well, I have a pain here, or I have a palpitation there, or what have you, and I check it out on WebMD, and I try to figure out in the middle of the night, well, something really seriously wrong with me or not. And usually, in fact, in my case, thank God, nothing is ever wrong with me.
Actually, that's a great place to start.
Right.
Because that contains all the information you can write down.
But it's about, WebMD tells you about the world. It doesn't tell you about you.
No, but
right?
personalized medicine builds on that, right? So imagine a WebMD that learns. And there
Right.
was talk about big data. Steve Koonin talked about big data this morning.
Right.
Well, imagine
Fine.
aggregating all
Right,
that
okay.
and then learning from
Right.
it.
But
Your genome is much less likely to be hypochondriac. But if you do have a brain tumor, you'd like to know that. So
yeah, sure.
So
I guess.
The idea, though, is to arm these tools with more knowledge and to make
Right,
the
but-
person really
Well,
participatory.
the place I was trying to go here is that what do we do with information that is scarifying, if you will, that we can't really do anything about? All we do is know. I have this, or I'm going to get that, or I have a high risk for that. But the medical community doesn't really have even preventive therapies, let alone curative therapies for what I may learn. So that they're in the foreseeable future, we can learn a lot about ourselves using these diagnostic technologies, and some of them may involve just downloading an app and pricking your finger and getting a little blood sample, and there's some transducer that translates what's in the blood up to some central computer, and it'll tell you what you've got. But you can't do anything about it, even if you go and consult your doctor. So what about that side of the personalized medicine?
Well, I like the way Francis Collins puts it in his book, The Language of Life. There's RBI, risk times benefit or burden, right, times intervention. In other words, if you calculate your total risk, if it's big, it's something you should pay attention to. If the burden of the disease, it's not whether you have liquid earwax or solid earwax, doesn't really matter. We do have mutations for that, by the way. But if there's a burden, and it's a heavy burden like diabetes, that's something you should pay attention to. And then the third multiplier, which can be 0, is intervention. So you're saying there are some things that you really can't do much about at this point, but you still may want to know. So people have to have a choice to obtain specific information. That's where counseling comes in, right? Do you really want to know if you're going to get early onset Alzheimer's? Maybe people don't want to know because there's not much you can do about it. And other people say, well, there is something I can do about it. Or I want to change the way that I'm living. So these are personal choices about your personal information.
Yeah, but I think that we have to be aware that these choices will confront us. Okay, Scott, do you want to weigh in on this?
Well, I want to agree that there are a number of things right now that we don't have interventions for. I think many people would choose to know, but for every gotcha of that sort, like with Alzheimer's or other intractable diseases where we don't have treatment, there's other drugs that have side effects or have unconventional dose response curves, or have what are called xenobiotic effects, where if you take drug 1 and then you take drug 2, you either make the first drug dramatically more effective or dramatically less effective. And so there's been many cases of people on some psychiatric compounds that discover that it makes their birth control pills no longer work. And that's not a good combination. So if they're taking something for stress, that kind of adds to the stress. So these are genetically predictable cross reactions, and I would like to know those things. And I'd also like to know if I should retire early if I'm going to do the early also.
It's time, Scott, it's time.
Well, yeah, we have just a few more minutes before I want to open up the question, open up the time for questions. So a couple of other subjects that all three of us would like to get to. One of them is who gets to control this information? So if we have a lot of diagnostic information, a profile information about our genome, our biomes, our proteomes, et cetera, and it's all on a computer somewhere so that if something should befall one of us in some place that it can be easily downloadable by a physician who could make productive use of it, how do we control that information so that it is not hacked, so that it is not used for perverse purposes, such as informing your insurance company, informing your employer, or informing the media or your neighbors or your business rivals or maybe even the electorate, okay? So what do we do about that?
I'm going to take the Steve Koonin out. I'm not a policy. I mean, this is a ubiquitous problem in all our personal data, right? We're being watched in every form whatsoever, and now we're developing all these technologies for the examined self, right? Where you can have your heart rate and your blood oxygen, and you can monitor everything. You can sequence the microbes in your belly button, right? So we got two challenges. One is, what does that information mean, right? You've got terabytes of information, and you have to assume that it's going to be accessible, right? Because there aren't even laws against that in many states of collecting DNA from someone and sequencing them. So it's very easy to do that if someone wants to do it. So there have to be good programs put in place to make data as secure as possible. What those are is not at all clear. And the other argument, actually I want to bring it in, is that the more these data are aggregated, the more valuable they are to all of us, right? Because the tools that are being developed have to learn from the data. Data points are useless by themselves, right? Data do not equal knowledge. Knowledge does not equal actionable things. So the only way you build knowledge is to have the data, but then also know what the outcomes are. So you actually have to build databases where we know all the information about you, but we also know whether you're healthy or not. And those become easily identifiable, as Steve Koonin showed us this morning. So I think we either have to live with it or learn how to protect it in some useful way.
Let me turn to a related subject. Both of you are far more socially responsible than Francis lets on, and I mean that as a compliment. One of the issues that arises in the rapid development of this kind of technology and production of information is the commercialization of it, in which you both have experience. And so I'm eager to ask, to see what you have to say here. We know that where, in some cases, for example, Myriad Genetics' control of the BRCA1 and BRCA2 genes had adverse effects on the delivery and accessibility of diagnostic information involving those genes. And recent, 2 years ago, the Supreme Court knocked down the patentability of human genes. So what about the, looking forward, the commercial control of a lot of these technologies, and some kind of commerce is necessary in order to get them out into the real world of diagnostic medicine. So how do we walk the line between, on the one side, excessive commercial control, which makes the prices too high, unaffordable, and so on, and therefore the technology is relatively inaccessible for a lot of people in the medical marketplace, and on the other side, ensuring that these technologies do get developed in a way that are made accessible through the market?
Excellent question, and it is a big challenge because the first question that every investor's ever asked me is, what's the IP position? And so
that means intellectual property.
Yeah. So has it been patented? Is it protectable? And there in every one of the cases where we've been successful in getting funding, we have some sort of trade secret or patent protection where that gives us a leverage. The question is, how do you motivate both the development of the tool and then the pricing that's fair? And I guess one of the things I'm very curious about is if the preventative or predictive or personal medicine, however we want to call it, might change the economics for big pharma to develop the blockbusters. Because right now, it has to be a drug that works for everybody in this room. And if we go personalized, it might be good enough. And it might be less expensive to figure out that one of the drugs is great for me and bad for 90% of the room. So I'm hoping it might actually make it more accessible rather than the restrictive use of patents. But Francis, what's your...
Yeah, just briefly, then we're going to go to the...
I think that public and private partnerships will work here, right? You cannot patent genes anymore, and I think that's great. But in this business, the value will be in having the knowledge base, having the databases, and that's why I'm definitely for aggregating databases in the public domain, right? That everyone can access. If this is all commercially driven, then the databases will be in the private domain, like they are with the Myriad genetics. Even though they don't have a patent now on the gene, they have all the information that really matters for the BRCA gene, and that's given them an especially strong position. So we need to have the government's role, and government research can help promote the public version of those databases that we can all draw upon.
And there's tremendous evidence for showing that if you are willing to share the data, you actually help yourself as well as your competitor. And this has shown up in science with the discovery of the recent schizophrenia genes that have been identified. Each of the multiple groups were not sharing their data. They did not have the statistical power to find some of the genes that are looking like very good candidates now, some of which might be druggable. So you might imagine new pharmacologies appearing. When they finally aggregated, they got very, very good data. Same thing is happening in some of the pharma efforts, and Ray Stevens, who just moved to USC, has made a consortium in this organization he calls the Bridge. And the idea of the Bridge is to bring together these different stakeholders. And he offered membership to, I think, 10 big pharmas, and he got 12 that signed up. And the thing is, the cost of entry is some money and some disclosure so that we could aggregate the data. And it was surprising. He was hoping he'd get half what he got, and they're voting with their feet. So we may be seeing the realization that this is a way of making very expensive commercialization efforts become more accessible financially.
Fine, thank you very much to both of you. And now we're going to open up the session to questions from the audience. Please stand up, say who you are, wait till you get the microphone before you speak, and be sure that you ask a question and don't give a lecture.
And neither one of us are MDs, so
Yes.
if you've got a weird itchy patch, we can't help.
Okay, right in the center over here. And don't be bashful because it's a technical subject.
Hi, I'm Anne Marie.
Turn it on. Oh, okay.
Hi, I'm Anne Marie. How long before
Hold it up to your...
How long before the insurance companies require that you spit into a vial before they insure you for your life?
How long before the insurance companies what?
Ask you to do a
You just
genetic...
spit into a vial.
They already ask you your family history and your health history, so they know a lot about you, but those are the sorts of policy issues that really are frightening, right? Because if an insurer, your long-term disability insurance finds out that you are 70% likely to have early onset Alzheimer's, do you lose that? And there are no laws to protect you in many
wait a minute.
states.
There's the Genetic Information Something Act, GINA, which was passed some years ago, which forbids discrimination.
Discrimination, but not in certain types of insurance, right? Not in
it's
health insurance. But I said long-term disability.
Long-term disability.
Yeah. These
Say
are
again?
different situations. Health insurance, sure.
Yes, sir, over there.
John Fresh. I'm a physician, and I have 3 physician children in my family. One of the questions I have is, maybe just for comment, when you get diseases, as you mentioned earlier, like prostate cancer, where we know across-the-board treatment is very aggressive and in most cases maybe not necessarily needed in the state of progression that we have, how do you then convince the medical community with the information you have, and what timeline do you think that will really take?
I
Well,
think,
Please.
go for it.
I think doctors want to do best by their patients, right? But they're not given a whole lot of time to learn about all these brand new technologies. I think that the professional organizations have to help, and the true benefit has to be brought to them, right? They have to know that it's worth spending the time to learn how to do this and partner with the patient. I think the patient needs to bring this information, that we really do have a responsibility to do a lot of education where it's not so obvious. Sure, if you go to Sloan Kettering, you'll get the highest standard of care, but you're not necessarily going to get it from a doctor in Indiana who's swamped with 15-minute appointments all day long.
But
Yeah, go ahead.
just to amplify that on that a little bit, I was just talking to an orthopedic surgeon that we're collaborating with, and the length of stay used to be largely dictated by wallet biopsy, and he's now using other tests and really starting to deploy that knowledge to decide how quickly can he get a given patient out the door after a hip or knee replacement. So I know some people at least are eager to be early adopters, and it's going to be their experience in showing the decrease in returns to the hospital and better, more cost-effective care that's going to have to prove it. So it's going to be a learning process.
Yes, there.
Hi, Pamela Stieg. I had like a related question, which is the work that you're doing, does it show anything in terms of, say, somebody who perhaps has an inability to absorb a certain vitamin or a hormonal imbalance that's impacting their health, and then how that would relate perhaps in areas of psychiatry, which still seems almost more than any other medicine to be a guessing game? Will this impact this in any way?
Certainly. There's no doubt. I mean, that's one of the least understood. That's one of the big opportunities to know who should respond to psychiatric drugs, for example, SSRIs. And there are certain markers that are being correlated to outcomes in these things. So I think that's a very important area. And it's not my specialty area, so I'm not going to answer specific things. But I do know in the wellness area that there are many people who are vitamin deficient who don't even know it, and that not necessarily genetically based, although it might be, but all the other measurements that are so easy to do and so low cost can identify problems early on before they really become a major problem for health.
Yes, here in the front row.
Microphone's on the way.
Dion McGrath. I'm so close, I don't need to stand, I think. I have a 3-part question. Years ago, I heard that there was something proposed like a medical passport, where you start early on and your measles, mumps, chickenpox, and so forth gets reported and recorded for the rest of your life. If that's possible today, that's my first question. 2, should it be compulsory or voluntary? And 3, if so, if we do have something like that, why can't we require information to be given only to a certain person, like the healthcare proxy that I draft every day, and it's got the HIPAA provision, which says you may only give my health care information to the person that I appoint.
Right.
That could be part of this medical passport, as I'm calling it that for lack of a better term.
I will tell you, because I've moved recently from New Haven, Connecticut to New York City and had to sign up with a bunch of different doctors and a dentist, that I've had to fill out many, many forms giving all of my diseases, et cetera.
Exactly.
And it would be great. Your question prompts me to think it would be great if I could just have a standardized form on my phone and I could give it to them instead of having to spend 15 minutes every time. But go ahead.
I was just going to say that in the U.S., there's so many different payers and so many different medical record efforts right now that compatibility has been a big limitation. We're doing some of our testing in Ireland and in Leeds and in places where there's single payer, and hence, and in, well, a number of European countries have been very cooperative, where they have a common passport type record that's transportable. And it will be interesting to see how you can control the delivery of that information. I think people are worried about it. But each one of the people developing in the US, the new record formats, I think they view having to share somebody else's record format rather than using their own as sort of like sharing their toothbrush or something. And so it has not been easy to get them on board.
Francis?
Yeah, you'd think it would be, it makes just so much sense to have accessible electronic records. You all should have all of your records. Do you? You probably see 7 different doctors, and none of them has all of your records. You certainly don't have all of your records. That's insane. How can you be empowered if you don't have access to your own records?
Is there any right that we have to all of our records? Yeah. Yes. Do we have a right?
Yes, you do. It's just hard to get. Yes. You have to go and Xerox those pages yourself.
Yes, sir.
Well, we didn't answer the rest of the question, though. That's really, should those be accessible by anybody? Was the third part? Yeah. Right, who should have access? They belong to you. We pay for them, right? The consumer pays for health care, whether you pay an insurance premium or not. We pay for them. They belong to us, right? And they should not be accessible by anyone else until we give permission. That's what it should be, what it is.
But it also should be accessible to us.
It should be accessible to us,
Right.
yes.
To begin with, right. Yes, we need a microphone here, please.
My name is Arthur Einstein. You've described a wonderful world of information-based medicine that I can look forward to. At the same time, I feel that the medical establishment over the centuries has stood in the way of progress day after day, month after month, year after. We're not that far from bleeding with leeches. So my question is, what are the barriers that stand in the way for you as scientists to achieve these ends and get them actionable? You talked about actionable information. Get them into a place where I can really use them, take advantage of them.
Scott, this might be a good place for you to jump in with the issue of regulation and innovation in this area.
It's an interesting question. I can tell you that we have not had a problem finding clinicians that are willing to be early adopters. So we have an instrument that we built the first prototype, and we immediately had questions or orders for replication 3 different places in the U.S., the NIH, a couple different in Europe. So I think there are places willing to be early adopters, and I have not had the experience with the Luddite physician phenotype. But I have watched the battles between radiology and cardiology, for example, over heart imaging. And I see a smile back from a physician in the back, so I think he probably has other examples. We do need to think about the regulatory sort of how to grease the wheels appropriately.
Well,
and
but
how
maybe
to
you should
protect things
explain,
appropriately.
maybe one of you would explain the issue for our audience of the regulation.
Well, I think there's facts that base this up. 5 years ago, you could go to 23andMe and have a whole set of biomarkers obtained on your personal genome that would give you specific data about your relative risk of disease. FDA clamped down on that, absolutely stopped it, and said you are dispensing medical advice exactly without giving people context. And that could cause harm, right? Could cause worry, could cause people to take the wrong kind of action. So that's now working its way through the FDA, how to give people access to this information and how to turn it into knowledge. These are happening right now. This is what's so exciting. And the venture that Scott mentioned that I'm involved with Leroy Hood at the Institute for Systems Biology in Seattle will have to deal with that. That just was announced, if you heard Market Watch on Wednesday morning. David Brancaccio interviewed Lee Hood, and the company's called Aravale. The whole idea then is to have a doctor on board to interpret your results and interact with you to give you the appropriate counseling for that. So we have to find the right model that brings the benefit with the least costs to the patients.
But would you disagree that the FDA would you disagree with the decision of the FDA that raw information, which they didn't just provide as in a raw form, they indicated that this puts you at risk with this, that, and the other thing, that was a wrong decision by the FDA? I thought it was
certainly
the right,
the companies.
I thought it was the right decision.
The companies think it was a terrible decision.
well,
Yeah.
the company, of course,
But
but
what
as
do
a member
you
of the
think?
public, I thought it was the right decision.
Well, but see, that's playing the nanny state, right? It's our DNA. Don't we have a right to that information?
Well, do you have a right? No. Do you have a right to any drug? Let's escalate the issue. Do you have a right to any drug? You want to go in and buy any drug, consume it, let your kids do it? Of course you have regulation. There's regulation by parents, there's regulation by law, there's regulation by regulatory agencies, and all with, I think, good purpose. Okay? We can't just have a freewheeling medical delivery system. It's dangerous and counterproductive, is my view. Okay?
But this was information. It wasn't. It was just information on.
It was not only information. They were telling you what this means. So they were giving you medical advice at the same time.
You got a second opinion.
Well, if you know enough to do that. All right. I've stepped out of my role as moderator here.
This is good. No. This is good.
Okay. So we have another question here. This discussion has provoked a lot of hands. So please try to be brief in your questions.
And in our answers.
My name is Linda, and you mentioned Arivale. And the cost of this, I've had friends who have done the DNA sequencing, and the cost was $4,000 or something. And the cost has come down on that. Where, as a consumer, do all of us in this room go to, what do we Google to go find all the websites where we can have a choice of who we select to do our genome sequencing?
Linda, we're talking about the future here. Because that future, you could have done it. There are people I've met here at this meeting who were able to do it a few years ago, and they are grandfathered in. I see you have it. You have it. And so you are grandfathered in, and you can continue to get updated information that none of us can get. $400. That's how much it costs. And how long ago did you do it? 2010. So 5 years ago, you could get this, and today you cannot. So Aravale will be offering this service in San Francisco next. It's available in Seattle for the next 10,000 people that sign up. And that will cost, I think they're saying $2,000 a year, which is for monitoring and health, a year, for constant monitoring and health, scientific, wellness-based medicine. But this is just one of many startups in the area. I think the FDA will come up with reasonable rules, and there will be an upswelling of different models. And the consumer will have the choice to participate or not. Doctors, I hope, will participate, and then we'll see confluence.
Well, then when we're in Europe traveling, can we do it in
Well,
Switzerland?
let's have another question, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Dwight Lee. As the insurance industry moves from fee-for-service to outcomes-based pricing, how do you see the interaction of that and personalized medicine and the needs of an individual to get treatment?
Well, I think they're very co-aligned. That's why I was bringing up the orthopedic surgeon earlier, is that he was trying to make knowledge-based decisions on how long to keep somebody in for their benefit. And, you know, with their desire to get out of the hospital as soon as possible. So I think we'll have more of that. I think practiced properly, it will reduce the returns in. And so I am anticipating that the insurance companies will be relatively accepting of this. Because the cost of doing the wrong thing, the cost of a hip or a knee gone wrong is orders of magnitude more than one that goes right. And so knowing the ones that are going wrong based on the tools or the ones likely to go wrong, I think it could really change the overall price tag.
We have time for one more question. Yes.
What do you see as the future of telemedicine? I know it's a very broad term with lots of different definitions, but perhaps for the audience you can explain it. In that context, speak to the fact that although everybody in this audience may be from different jurisdictions, that there are still state laws and regulations and licensure provisions in each state that could regulate whether or not you can have access to these kinds of new technologies. And by the way, my name is Donna Fresh. I'm married to him, and I'm not a doctor.
Well, actually, we're not doctors, and we're not regulators. So that's a really interesting question that we do not have time. I don't have time to honestly give you a meaningful answer.
But I can say a little bit. I think there's a number of companies that are trying to work in telemedicine, not so much to replace physicians, but as a way of turning information into knowledge. And so I work a lot in eye disease. The major reading centers are places that convert data into actionable knowledge. And that form of telemedicine, I think, is being strongly encouraged and has a lot of upsides. I agree with you that, and I think with Francis, that it is also a quagmire of state restrictions and other things that nobody has gotten their head around yet.
Unfortunately, I have to call this session to a close. I want to thank Scott and Francis for a marvelous discussion and all of you for your participation. Thank you.